In the shadow of the whispering pines, where the Montana sky stretched like an endless quilt of faded denim, Eliza Hawthorne knelt in the cool grass of her father's churchyard, her fingers tracing the worn edges of a family Bible. It was the summer of 1923, and at 19, she was a vision of quiet grace, porcelain skin dusted with freckles, auburn hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet, and eyes the color of storm-tossed seas. But beneath that serene exterior beat the heart of a girl caged by piety and expectation. Her father, Reverend Josiah Hawthorne, preached fire and brimstone from his pulpit every Sunday, his voice a thunderclap against the sins of the world. To him, Eliza was the untouched lamb, pure and unyielding, destined for a life of hymns and hushed prayers. Riding horses, dancing under the stars. Those were the devil's invitations, he declared, pulling her further into the suffocating folds of his faith. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in gold, a stranger rode into Willow Creek like a myth come alive. He was Elias Bear Colton, a giant of a man, broad as a barn door and tall enough to make the church steeple seem squat. His Stetson shadowed a face etched by wind and wanderlust, deep-set hazel eyes that held secrets older than the Rockies, a jaw like carved granite, and hands calloused from years of roping steers and mending fences on ranches from Texas to the Dakotas. Bear wasn't fleeing trouble, no, he was chasing solitude, drawn to this forgotten corner of Montana by whispers of open land and forgotten trails. He'd lost his own kin to the influenza a few years back, his wife and little boy, snatched away in a single cruel season, and since then, he'd become a ghost on horseback, helping where he could, vanishing before dawn could name him. Eliza first saw him from the church window, his silhouette cutting against the horizon as he dismounted in the town square, his massive chestnut gelding, Thunder, snorting steam into the crisp air. The townsfolk gathered like crows to a carcass, murmuring about the giant cowboy who'd ridden in without a saddle, bareback on that beast, as if the wind itself carried him. Reverend Hawthorne, spotting the disturbance from his study, strode out with Bible in hand, ready to cast judgment on this interloper. "Stranger," he boomed, "this is a God-fearing town. State your business, or be on your way." Bear tipped his hat, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Evenin', Reverend. Name's Bear Colton. Just passin' through, lookin' for a place to bed down my horse and maybe lend a hand if there's work. Ain't here to stir souls, just stomachs." He patted Thunder's flank, the horse nuzzling his pocket for the apple he always carried. The Reverend's eyes narrowed, but the mayor, old Mr. Wilkins, piped up from the crowd. "We could use a strong back at the mill, Bear. River's risin', and the bridge needs mendin' before the rains hit." And so, Bear stayed. Not in a boarding house, but in the livery stable, where the scent of hay and leather became his sanctuary. Eliza watched him from afar, her chores taking her past the stable each evening, fetching water from the well, delivering baskets of bread to the widows. He moved with a gentleness that belied his size, whispering to Thunder as he brushed the horse's coat until it gleamed like polished mahogany. One twilight, as fireflies began their dance, Eliza's bonnet slipped in the breeze, and a loose curl tumbled free. She reached to pin it, but her basket tipped, spilling apples across the dirt path. Before she could bend, Bear was there, his shadow engulfing her like a protective cloak. "Easy now, miss," he said, scooping the fruit with hands that could crush stone yet cradled each apple like a fragile egg. Their eyes met, hers wide with the shock of proximity, his softening with a warmth that made her breath hitch. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely threading the air. He straightened, towering over her, but offered a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "No thanks needed. Name's Bear. And you?" "Eliza. Eliza Hawthorne." She hesitated, glancing toward the church spire piercing the dusk. "My father's the preacher." He nodded, no judgment in his gaze. "Heard the sermons echoing down the hill. Fine words, if a man listens close." He handed back the basket, their fingers brushing, a spark, innocent as summer lightning, that sent a flush creeping up her neck. For the first time in years, Eliza felt seen, not as the preacher's shadow, but as a girl with dreams stitched into the hem of her skirt. Days blurred into weeks, and Bear became the quiet heartbeat of Willow Creek. He hauled timber for the mill, his muscles straining under sweat-soaked shirts that clung like a second skin, revealing the tattoos of lost loves inked on his forearms, a rose for his wife, a tiny boot for his son. The children adored him, clambering onto his shoulders as he told tales of wild mustangs and starry nights over campfires. But Eliza kept her distance, her father's warnings a constant refrain: "The world outside these walls is a den of wolves, child. Trust only in the Lord." Yet, curiosity gnawed at her like a persistent wind, eroding the walls she'd built. One evening, after Vespers, she found herself lingering by the stable, the air thick with the scent of rain-kissed earth. Thunder nickered softly, and Bear emerged from the shadows, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can't sleep?" he asked, leaning against the post. Eliza shook her head, her bonnet discarded for once, hair cascading like a auburn waterfall. "Father says the night holds temptations. But I wonder what's out there, beyond the pines." Bear chuckled, a sound rich as aged whiskey. "Out there's freedom, Eliza. Wide skies and rivers that sing. Ever ridden a horse? Not in a buggy, mind, bareback, feelin' the heartbeat under you, wind in your hair like God's own whisper." Her eyes lit with a forbidden spark. "No. Father says it's unseemly for a lady. But I've watched you with thunder. You too, you're like one soul." He studied her, seeing the yearning etched in the curve of her lips. "Worlds full of unseemly things that heal the spirit. Tell you what, tomorrow, after chores, I'll teach you. Just a gentle ride, nothin' more. Thunder's patient as a saint." She should have said no. The words burned on her tongue. But in that moment, with the stars winking like conspirators, Eliza nodded. "Yes. Teach me." Dawn broke with a blush of pink, and Eliza slipped from the parsonage like a thief, her heart pounding a rebel rhythm. Bear waited at the meadow's edge, Thunder saddled not with leather but with a simple blanket, bareback, as promised. "Climb on," he said, cupping his hands for her foot. She hesitated, skirts bunching awkwardly, but his touch was steady, lifting her with effortless grace onto the horse's warm back. Thunder shifted, and panic flickered in her chest. "Easy," Bear murmured, mounting behind her, his chest a solid wall against her spine. "Breathe with him. Feel his breath, match it." His arms encircled her loosely, one hand on the reins, the other resting light on her waist, not possessive, but anchoring. They started slow, a walk through the whispering grass, the world unfolding in greens and golds. Eliza's fear ebbed with each step, replaced by a thrill that uncoiled in her belly like a waking serpent. "You're a natural," Bear said, his breath warm against her ear. "Like you were born to this." She laughed, a sound foreign and free, and urged Thunder to a trot. The wind tugged at her hair, stripping away the pins until it flew wild, a banner of liberation. For the first time, Eliza felt untethered, the preacher's daughter dissolving into the girl who dreamed of horizons. But freedom, like all wild things, carries teeth. As they crested the hill, a shout shattered the idyll. Reverend Hawthorne, astride a borrowed mare, barreled toward them, face twisted in righteous fury. "Eliza! Down from that beast, now!" He'd followed her trail, his Bible forgotten in his haste. Bear reined Thunder to a halt, dismounting swiftly to shield her. "Reverend, she's safe. Just a lesson in the open air." "Safe?" Josiah spat, dismounting with trembling hands. "With a drifter? A man who strips away decency like he strips that saddle? Get down, girl, before you sully your soul." Eliza slid to the ground, cheeks burning, but something fierce ignited in her eyes. "Father, it's not." "Silence." He grabbed her arm, yanking her toward his horse. Bear stepped forward, his giant frame a barrier. "No harm done, sir. Let her speak." The Reverend whirled, jabbing a finger at Bear's chest. "You, giant of sin, stay away from my daughter. She's promised to purity, to a life without your barbaric ways." The words hung heavy, a condemnation that sliced deeper than any whip. Eliza wrenched free, tears stinging. "Promised? To what, father? A cage of your making? Bear showed me kindness, not sin." The meadow fell silent, save for Thunder's uneasy snort. Josiah's face crumpled, not in anger, but in the raw ache of a father's fear. He'd lost Eliza's mother to the wilds years ago, a woman who rode bareback until the day she drowned in a swollen river, chasing adventure. To him, this was history's cruel echo. That night, as thunder rolled over Willow Creek, Eliza sat by her window, the rain a relentless confessor. Bear's lesson had cracked her world open, revealing not just the joy of the ride, but the weight of her father's unspoken grief. She penned a note by candlelight, "Thank you for the wind in my wings. But I fear I've brought storm to your door." Slipping it under the stable door at midnight, she fled back to the parsonage, unaware that Bear read it under lantern light, his heart twisting like rope. The days that followed were a fragile truce. Reverend Hawthorne forbade Eliza from the stable, assigning her endless scripture readings and mending for the church ladies. Bear threw himself into work, mending the bridge alone under moonlit skies, his hammer strikes echoing his solitude. Whispers spread through town, the preacher's daughter and the giant cowboy, a tale spun from scandal and star-crossed glances. Mr. Wilkins pulled Bear aside one evening at the general store. "Folks are talkin', son. Best ride out before it boils over." But Bear couldn't leave. Not with Eliza's laughter still ringing in his ears, not with the way her eyes had bloomed like wildflowers under his gaze. He'd known loss, buried it deep, but this girl, this pure, fierce spirit, stirred something dormant, a hope he'd thought long rotted in the grave. Then came the flood. It started as a murmur in the hills, the river swelling like a vengeful god. By noon, Willow Creek was a torrent of mud and menace, the half-mended bridge buckling under the onslaught. Folks scrambled, women clutching children, men stacking sandbags, but the water rose relentless, claiming the mill, the schoolhouse porch, everything in its path. Reverend Hawthorne stood on the church steps, praying fervently, but his voice drowned in the roar. Eliza, defying orders, waded into the fray, her skirts sodden, helping evacuate the elderly from low-lying homes. That's when she saw him, Bear, waist-deep in the current, his massive arms hauling a fallen tree from the bridge's span. A child's cry pierced the chaos. Little Tommy Wilkins, swept from his mother's arms, clung to a branch bobbing toward the rapids. Eliza screamed, but the water pulled her under. In that heartbeat of terror, Bear dove. Like a force of nature, he cleaved the flood, his body a bulwark against the surge. He snatched Tommy, tucking the boy against his chest, and fought back to shore, muscles screaming, lungs burning. Eliza reached them first, collapsing in the mud, cradling the shivering child. Bear hauled himself up beside her, coughing river from his lungs, his shirt torn and bloodied from the debris. You saved him," she gasped, her hands trembling as she touched his face, tracing a gash above his eye. "Couldn't let the little one go," he rasped, his hazel eyes locking on hers. "Like I almost let you." The words hung, profound and unbidden, a realization that in teaching her to ride, he'd found his own path back to life. Reverend Hawthorne arrived then, drenched and ashen, witnessing the scene. He knelt, pulling Tommy into his arms, but his gaze fixed on Bear, the man who'd stripped away the saddle of fear, revealing the bareback truth of courage. "You risked everything," Josiah whispered, voice breaking. Bear shrugged, wincing. "Ain't nothin', compared to losin' what matters." He glanced at Eliza, and in that look passed 1,000 unspoken vows. The flood receded by dawn, leaving Willow Creek scarred but standing. As the town rebuilt, so did its people. Reverend Hawthorne sought Bear out at the stable that evening, Bible absent for once. "I judged you hasty, Colton. Saw a wolf where there was a shepherd." He extended a hand, calloused from sermons now clasping one forged in labor. Eliza, she speaks of you with light in her eyes. Teach her more than writing. Teach her to live. Bear nodded, throat tight. I'd be honored, Reverend. But only if it's her choice. From that day, the lessons continued, not just on horseback, but in the quiet arts of the heart. Bear showed Eliza how to mend a fence with wire and will, how to read the stars as maps of mercy. She, in turn, read to him from her mother's old journals, tales of a woman who rode free and loved fiercely. Unexpected turns wove through their days, a rattlesnake in the meadow that Bear dispatched with steady calm, teaching Eliza the grace of facing fears, a town dance where Josiah himself coaxed his daughter onto the floor, her bare feet, stripped of shoes, twirling under lantern light. Yet, the deepest turn came unannounced. One crisp autumn eve, as leaves turned to fire, Bear confessed his ghosts by the campfire's glow. Lost my Sarah and little Jack to the sickness. Buried them under Texas stars, thinkin' I'd ride forever alone. Then you made me remember what it's like to hold tomorrow. Tears traced his cheeks, unashamed, and Eliza took his hand, her touch a balm. And you stripped away my fears, Bear. Showed me I'm not just the preacher's shadow, I'm a woman, whole and wanting. Their lips met then, soft as the wind's sigh, a kiss not of passion's fire, but compassion's quiet flame. It was the act that transformed, Bear, the wanderer, finding home in her gaze, Eliza, the virgin soul, blooming into her own sacred wildness. Winter cloaked Willow Creek in a hush of snow, blanketing the sins and sorrows of the flood in crystalline forgiveness. Eliza Hawthorne moved through those months like a woman reborn, her steps lighter, her laughter a melody that danced on the frosted air. The bareback rides with Bear had become ritual, morning stolen before dawn, when the world slept and the pines whispered secrets only they could hear. Thunder carried them higher into the hills, where the snow-dusted ridges offered vistas that stretched to eternity, mirroring the vastness awakening in her heart. Bear's presence was her anchor, his stories of far-flung prairies weaving tapestries of possibility. Life ain't about stayin' put, he'd say, his voice a gravelly hymn. It's about ridin' the currents, trustin' the pull. But renewal, like spring's first thaw, unearthed buried roots. Reverend Josiah watched his daughter with eyes newly softened, yet shadowed by the ghosts of his youth. In the quiet of his study, he'd pore over his late wife's letters, her words a siren's call, Josiah, my love, the river took me not because I tempted it, but because I embraced it. Let our Eliza fly, or she'll wither like a flower denied the sun. The flood had been his reckoning, Bear's heroism a mirror to his own failings. No longer the iron-fisted patriarch, Josiah began seeking counsel, not from scripture alone, but from the cowboy who'd mended more than bridges. One Sabbath, after a sermon laced less with brimstone and more with grace, Josiah invited Bear to the parsonage for supper. The table groaned under Eliza's pies and stews, the air thick with the scent of rosemary and unspoken hopes. Bear arrived scrubbed clean, his Sunday best a faded flannel that strained at the seams, a bouquet of winter berries clutched in his massive fist. For the lady of the house, he said, handing them to Eliza with a bow that drew her giggle. Josiah cleared his throat, pouring coffee strong as his convictions. Colton, Bear, I've prayed on this. Eliza's no child anymore. She's a woman with a spirit that rivals her mother's. If you're of mine to court her proper, you'd have my blessing. The words landed like snowflakes, soft, yet accumulating into something profound. Bear's fork paused midway to his mouth, hazel eyes flicking to Eliza's. She blushed, but held his gaze, her hand finding his under the tablecloth, fingers intertwining like vines claiming a trellis. Reverend, Bear replied, voice steady as the earth, I ain't a church-goin' man, but I honor what's sacred. Eliza's light to me, like finned-in water in the desert. If she'll have me, I'll spend my days guardin' that flame. That night, as stars pricked the velvet sky, Eliza and Bear walked the churchyard paths, snow crunching underfoot. Is this real? She whispered, leaning into his side, his arm a warm bulwark against the chill. He stopped, turning her to face him, his breath clouding the air between. Real as the heartbeat under us, darlin'. But real things need nurturin'. Come spring, I'll build us a cabin on the ridge, nothin' fancy, just walls to hold our dreams. She nodded, tears freezing on her lashes. And I'll fill it with songs and stories. No more cages, Bear. Only skies. Yet, fate, that capricious rider, had twists yet to uncoil. Word reached Willow Creek of a greater peril, not water, but want. The drought in the Dakotas had driven desperate ranchers south, their herds thinning the land like locusts. Letters arrived at the post office, pleas for aid, families starving, children with hollow cheeks, the humanity of the plains fraying at the edges. Mr. Wilkins called a town meeting in the schoolhouse, maps unrolled like wounds. We ain't got much, he said, but what we do, we can share. Seed, tools, hands for rebuilding, Daught. Bear's face darkened as he scanned the missives, recognizing names from his wandering days, old compadres who'd shared his campfires, now broken by hardship. I know these folks, he said, rising like a oak in storm. They ain't beggars, they're fighters, same as us. I'll ride north, take what we can spare. But I can't do it alone. The room murmured, eyes turning to the giant cowboy who'd become their unspoken guardian. Eliza's heart clenched, freedom's gift now demanding sacrifice. That evening, by the hearth's glow, she confronted him. You're leaving. After all this, the rides, the promises. Her voice cracked, raw with the fear of loss she'd only begun to taste. Bear pulled her close, his embrace a fortress. Not leavin' you, Eliza. Goin' for them. For the boy who reminds me of Jack, the mother who sings like Sarah did. It's the humanity in us, darlin', the selflessness that binds us tighter than any vow. He cupped her face, thumb brushing a tear. And when I ride back, we'll build that cabin. Together. She searched his eyes, finding not desertion, but depth, a profound realization dawning. Love wasn't possession, but the grace to let go, trusting the return. Then teach me one last lesson, she said, voice fierce. How to ride alone. Bareback, into the wind. Dawn saw them at the meadow, thunder saddled with memory. Bear lifted her astride, but this time, he stepped back, reins in her hands. Feel him, Eliza. He's yours now. Trot, canter, let the rhythm be your prayer. She urged the horse forward, tentative at first, then bold, the snow flying like confetti from thunder's hooves. Bear watched, pride swelling in his chest, as she crested the hill, a silhouette of strength, hair whipping like a comet's tail. When she wheeled back, breathless and beaming, he knew, she'd stripped away her last fears, emerging whole. 2 weeks later, Bear rode out at the head of a caravan, wagons groaning with grain, tools, and town-spirited volunteers, including a chastened Reverend Josiah, who clutched his Bible like a shield. Eliza stood at the town's edge, waving until dust claimed them, her heart a drumbeat of hope and ache. Days stretched into a vigil. She tended the stable, whispering to thunder of adventures yet to come, taught the children simple songs of the trail, her voice a thread stitching community. Unexpected tidings arrived with the first robin of spring, a rider, battered and beaming, bearing word, the caravan had reached the Dakotas, hands blistered but spirits unbroken. Bear had led the charge, not with brute force, but kindness, sharing stories over campfires, mending fences with laughter, turning strangers into kin. One letter, scrawled in his bold hand, found its way to Eliza. The plains bloom again because good folks like you believed in sending light into dark. Hold the ridge for me, love. I'm ridin' home. The town buzzed with tales upon their return, how Bear had wrestled a stampede bareback on a borrowed Mustang, saving a dozen calves, how Josiah had preached not judgment, but unity, his words bridging divides like Bear's ropes tamed wild stock. But the true homecoming was quieter, under a canopy of budding pines. Bear found Eliza at the meadow, thunder grazing nearby, her figure etched against the sunset. He dismounted, striding to her with arms open wide. "You came back," she breathed, launching into his embrace, the world narrowing to the press of his heartbeat. "Always will," he murmured, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "Taught you to ride free, but you taught me to stay." Their kiss deepened then, a seal on promises forged in flood and frost, a union of souls, bare and unbreakable. The emotional climax unfolded not in grand gesture, but in quiet generosity. That summer, as Willow Creek healed, Bear and Eliza built their cabin on the ridge, timber rising under willing hands. Josiah contributed the first beam, etched with a verse from Proverbs, "A friend loves at all times." The town gathered for the raising, a quilt of quilts spread for the feast, children darting like fireflies. But the transformative act came from Bear, who deeded half the land to a fund for Dakota widows, seed money for new starts, a selfless echo of the humanity that had saved him. Eliza, radiant in a gown of simple white, stood beside him as the sun dipped low. "You've stripped away the world's weights," she said, hand on her swelling belly, their child, a secret bloom of joy. "Shown me kindness isn't weakness, it's the strongest ride of all." He smiled, that crinkle-eyed warmth that had first thawed her heart. "And you've shown me, darlin', that even giants need savon. Years wove onward, the cabin growing into a haven, walls echoing with lullabies, fields golden with harvest. Bear taught their son, little Jack Colton Hawthorne, to ride bareback at 5, his laughter a bridge across graves. Eliza penned tales for the town gazette, stories of wanderers and wonders, her words a beat